Hello everybody, welcome to Wonky Angle, where I talk about electronic music, both new and old, and, today I'm talking about the fifth album from Hybrid, Light of the Fearless. The fifth album from Hybrid, holy crap, those words actually came out of my mouth. Hybrid, that's Mike and Charlotte Truman, and previously it also included Chris Healings, but he left in 2015, unfortunately, but whatever. And, yeah, I kinda can't believe I'm actually talking about the fifth Hybrid album. Like, is this real life? I've just gotten so used to waiting for this album, and now suddenly the wait's over and it's finally here. Wow. I don't even know how to begin to talk about these guys, but, I guess I can start by saying that they're one of my favorite bands of all time. Easily in the top 10 somewhere, probably even top 5. I discovered them back when I was in high school, want to say 2012, a little before their Classics box set dropped. I found the track Beachcoma via a Pandora recommendation, picked up the whole Wide Angle album shortly after, and fell in love instantly. It was the first time I had ever heard an orchestra combined with electronic music, and it was such an amazing idea, not to mention so well executed that it's become one of the most listened albums of my entire life. I'd become completely obsessed with these guys in my sophomore year of high school, so blown away by everything they had to offer on their main albums, and frustrated by the fact that they only had 4. I wanted more! And there was a period not long after where I was searching around lots of other bands trying in vain to find something that might recapture that lightning in a bottle quality that Hybrid had delivered so long ago. Well, to be fair, I did discover BT in that period and found lots of other underrated artists in the process like Traffic and Way Out West, so it's not like I was wasting my time, but none of those artists were Hybrid. But it's not like in the long period between this album and their last one was silent either, but I'm getting way ahead of myself. How about I just go down my thoughts on their discography so far? In my top 5 favorite albums of all time. Seriously incredible from front to back. Only problem is that I think I've listened to it so much over the years that I can't really get any new insight out of it anymore, but yeah, still love it. This is probably the weakest of their mainline albums, but still amazing stuff here. Also awesome from front to back. Wasn't keen on this one the first couple of listens, but by this point it's basically on par with Wide Angle. Like, it's in my top 10 all-time favorites. Also marks the introduction of Charlotte Truman, then Charlotte James, as a permanent member of the band and frontwoman. Okay, so from this point on, they didn't release any more mainline albums, but they pumped out soundtrack after soundtrack almost annually, and none of them have been remotely bad. Well, this one with Tom Salta is probably my least favorite. Found it to be pretty forgettable. But this one was pretty good. Still come back to it every now and then. The highlight is probably their remix of Black Rebel Motorcycle Club's Beat the Devil's Tattoo. This one is weighed down by far too many subpar remixes of the same 5 tracks. But those 5 tracks, and just the stuff that Hybrid did by themselves, those are all top-notch work. I tend to treat it as like a mainline EP from them. Consistently excellent soundtrack that the movie it accompanied did not remotely deserve. Almost as great as the Vice soundtrack, but it's got a very different vibe. I didn't check out this and their next 2 soundtracks out until fairly recently, but this is some really nice, more chill stuff from them too. I'm hanging on to this one. Wasn't huge on this one, but I've never been much of a straight classical music guy, so if you're into that, you'll definitely enjoy it though. And, this is a slightly lesser clone of their soundtrack to the first Dead and Tombstone. I do think this soundtrack is still good, but when I have the first one to return to instead, there's not really much point in returning to this one. Which brings us to here. Yeah, so, obviously I've been following these guys super closely ever since I discovered them. Normally with a wait as long as this, I'd have eventually just lost interest and moved on, then be pleasantly surprised when the band would finally return. I mean, it's been 8 years since Disappear here, and even though I've really only been waiting 6 myself, this feels longer than any other long wait I've had between albums from bands and artists I've liked, because unlike most waits like these, my level of anticipation for this 5th album has not died down at any point. It still felt like it was coming around the corner this entire time. Hybrid kept delivering interesting stuff with their soundtrack work that could tide me over in the meantime. I never got the feeling at any point that a fifth Hybrid album was going to be anything short of brilliant from any of the stuff they released in the interim. Not only were all these soundtracks good, they were all different too. Except the two Dead and Tombstone ones. I'm never going to be able to anticipate another album in the same way that I did this one. Ever again. I'm not in high school anymore. I've just graduated college. I'm older now. I cover electronic album releases and video reviews on a very regular basis now. And I've almost kind of stopped going nuts with anticipation for things like I did for this album. Because now I know all too well what it's like to be let down by artists I like. Yet I still looked forward to Hybrid 5 as if I were still that same high schooler that had just discovered them. I'll be real, I'd be fully willing to wait another 3 years or even more if it meant that Hybrid were going to further perfect this album to be up to par with their previous body of work. These guys can take as long as they like, as far as I'm concerned, because if they put out something mediocre as a mainline album, that'd be especially depressing. This release had an insane amount of pressure to be great. And eventually, they did finally release a little pre-album single called Light Up, and, I don't know, I guess I kind of thought it was so freaking great that it almost single-handedly made up for the wait right then and there. Yeah, don't worry, I wouldn't have built up all that amount of pressure like that if I didn't think they didn't pull off what I was hoping from them with this album. While I don't think this album is as amazing as Disappear Here, I think this comes very, very close. I will say I do have my nitpicks with Light of the Fearless, and I'll just get those out of the way real quick. The main one isn't really a real issue, it's just more something that I would have liked to see. And that's how I thought it was a bit of a shame that there's only one instrumental on the whole album. I remember Disappear Here was lacking in instrumentals, because that only had 3, and one of them, City Siren, was just a reprise of a later track that served as an intro to a different one. I'm not sure if that one even really counts. But if my opinion on that album hadn't changed from my initial reactions, I think I'd have been pretty peeved at the fact that there's even less instrumentals here. And I won't act like I didn't wish there were more than just the one on this one. But like I said, Disappear Here was a massive grower for me, as all the other non-instrumentals won me over with their catchiness and their songwriting and just Charlotte Truman's personality. I stopped minding the lack of instrumentals there, and I don't mind the lack of instrumentals here either. Because even when they're basically doing the hybrid equivalent of pop songwriter songs, they're going to bring just as much to the table as they would for any other track, instrumental or non. Especially when it's being branded as a main album, because the pressure's really on to deliver the best they can. So if you're one of those people who didn't like Disappear Here thanks to its lack of instrumentals, you're gonna have a bad time here too. I mean, I have seen a couple of people complaining that this album was too mainstream, like that they were making some bid for getting in the top 40 and really watered down their sound or something like that. I don't know. Personally, this album was only marginally more mainstream than Disappear Here was. You want something that sounds like it was trying to be hybrid but ended up way too mainstream for its own good, try Ty D and Christopher Tin's Collide album from earlier this year. I mean, this could have been a lot worse, just saying. That album wasn't even that bad, it was just really freaking mainstream. Now sure, basically every track on Light of the Fearless is more trying to be catchy and centers around Charlotte Truman's personality, and there's only the one track, Long Time Coming, that's actually instrumental and provides the kind of soundscapes they could provide on previous albums. But all these tracks perfectly achieve the purpose they were intended for. They're huge, they're epic, the sound design is fantastic. They still sound like hybrid, but they're still really catchy and fun to sing along to as well. But it's also not a clone of Disappear Here either. Very similar for sure, but you can tell not just from the lyrics, but also the whole vibe of the album and even the title, that they're going for something a lot more optimistic this time around. Disappear Here stewed in negativity for basically the whole time. Tracks about your soul being broken, being numb, wanting to be saved from original sin. tasting salt on your skin. It got pretty pissed in parts. Not so much this album. There's a little bit of that negativity still lingering. I mean, they well know that we still live in a world where a lot of terrible stuff happens, but Charlotte Truman seems a lot more ready to rise up to the challenges than she did before. Like I said, much more optimistic, and quite frankly, optimism is something that I could use in 2018. So, going down track by track, starting with the opener, We Are Fearless. This was the first actual pre-album single, and I wasn't totally sold on it right from the get-go, mainly because it didn't feel like a single. It felt like an album intro, a build-up for what was to come, not so much an amazing track in its own right. But that's not to say I didn't come around on it. It's still very much an intro to me, but it's still got like a futuristic flavor to it that isn't quite matched by other tracks on here. All the synth arpeggios and dystopian break beats are really cool and sound like we're kind of transitioning out of that dark place that the last album was in, but you know, we're coming out of it now. By the time we get to Hold Your Breath, the transition is complete, and we get this track that has a whole bunch of these punchy Las Vegas horn sections or something. Like, it's already a lot more playful and upbeat than anything on their last album, or hell, anything they've done previously. Also a lot catchier than the opener. I'm here to let you know, I'm telling you where and when. It's time for you to go, so hold your breath and count to 10. I apologize for my terrible singing. It's not a track that offers a lot to discuss, but it is a ton of fun. We then get Superpower, which features a full gospel choir, talking about how anything is possible and your love will save the day. So much energy in this track, super uplifting, and another one of the catchiest tracks on this album. I heard that the gospel choir was actually like a last-minute addition, but it feels like the track wouldn't be complete without them or something. They fit really well into the track and into the sound and vibe. Those gospel choirs really helped make this one of the biggest highlights for me. Down to the Wire, meanwhile, probably wouldn't have stuck out to me much if I didn't already know the track long before the album was announced. They included this track on their Takedown soundtrack. And I asked on Twitter at one point before the album released if it was the same track, and someone who had apparently heard the album ahead of time told me, no, it's like an upbeat drum and bass type track. And I guess we were both right on this one. It is the same track from Takedown, first of all, but it's a new version. Like, the track now has like two halves. First half is more subtle and sounds basically just like that version from Takedown. But there's a new second half which suddenly turns the track into something more like Sounds of Life by Pendulum. A lot more fast-paced, but really refreshing. Yuck. But really refreshing and uplifting as well. Maybe not the catchiest track on here, but certainly a welcome addition, and hearing this much improved new version really made me smile. Anyways, next we get Usual Rules, which is a much more subtle track. No strong beats, just a lot of picturesque orchestral washes and a pretty catchy and emotional chorus, and also some pretty low-mixed cowbells. Notable mainly for the fact that Charlotte joked a lot on Twitter and elsewhere about the album needing more cowbell, and even put up a novelty hybrid cowbell for sale on their store, which is kind of funny. There's cowbell on, like, at least 3 other tracks on this album. I know there's some in Long Time Coming. I think there's some on either Superpower or Hold Your Breath. I don't... They took that more cowbell advice quite literally. Anyways, after that, we have the above-mentioned single Light Up, which I will have to admit is still probably the best track on the album, but wow. Ever since that single dropped, it's grown to become one of my favorite tracks from Hybrid ever. Like, it kind of reminds me of a track they had on the Drive Club soundtrack called Be Here Now. That track had 2 different versions. One was an instrumental that was kind of like their usual stuff, but a drum and bass track. And the other was like a vocal radio edit. And I felt like if you could combine those 2 different versions, you would get something truly amazing. And Light Up provides basically what I wanted out of that track initially. And I think this is even catchier than Be Here Now, has better lyrics too. It's just an incredible track. I have no freaking words for it. If you only ever listen to one track from the album, make it that one. And then there's Beauty Queen. That was a big surprise for me because it's like a straightforward rock song. complete with rougher electric guitars and a slow but hard-hitting acoustic drum kit. It almost borders on metal, but a very hybrid take on it. Did not at all expect a track like this on the album, but something like that to add more variety is definitely welcome. And Charlotte Truman sounds surprisingly pretty natural over this kind of instrumental. Then we get Shaking, which is the shortest track. I like it as a more subtle moment, but it does admittedly feel like a bit of a tacked-on interlude. I mean, it didn't add a ton that other tracks couldn't have. It wasn't that catchy either. Maybe it could have worked better as a second straight instrumental, I don't know. It's not a bad track though, I wouldn't want it removed. And then Long Time Coming is the single instrumental on the album, as I've mentioned before. Probably the biggest callback to the wide-angle sound as well. Again, really wish we got more of this kind of stuff. This track isn't even 5 minutes long, and it's over almost too quickly, but it is what it is. And then finally, the album ends with a Tom Petty cover of all things in I Won't Back Down. That is admittedly one of those tracks that I thought I didn't know, but once I listened to the original, I realized I had been hearing that one for years. But if you weren't already familiar with the original, you probably wouldn't have been able to guess it was a Tom Petty cover. I just immediately recognized it as Hybrid doing what they do best. It sounds like the big Break My Soul or Just For Today type climax of this album. I think it pulled a little bit from that one demo they dropped in 2014, Polaris, and it's traditional Hybrid through and through. Huge orchestras, layers upon layers of synths, and cinematic breakbeats. It's a fittingly large-scale and emotionally satisfying closer to this album. And it's quite a bit to cover in this thing. The only other big thing that I have to mention is that this album is also the shortest Hybrid album to date. All the others were over an hour, like 70 minutes each, about. This one's only 53 minutes. But it doesn't feel shorter than the others. It feels like it was the length that it should have been. Maybe one more longer instrumental track could have raised it right up to the hugeness of previous albums, but add another vocal track and this might have felt a bit much. Because every track is so dense, it has so much detail, everything is so over the top, I didn't feel like I came out of this album needing more. I got my fill and I was definitely satisfied. So, yeah, final thoughts on Light of the Fearless. Obviously, I love this album from front to back. I do think the appeal of this album is pretty different from that of Wide Angle, but I would have been equally in favor of more Disappear Here-like material like this, as I would be with some more Wide Angle type stuff. Maybe that'll be something for the 6th Hybrid album. That one could be more instrumental heavy, maybe. But I am absolutely satisfied with what we got here. Every track has something to like about it, the songwriting is really on point, and all the tracks are catchy, the sound design is amazing, the orchestras are incredible. I mean, I had insanely high expectations for this album. I didn't know what it was going to be, but I knew it was going to be great, and those expectations were met. Considering they had a 6-year build-up for me that they were going to be paying off on, and a build-up that I had been watching the entire time, it would have been easy to put out something disappointing and kill that build-up entirely. And it could have happened, especially considering one of their members left in 2015, but they didn't do that. This was exactly as great as I'd hoped it would be, and as for the final rating, I will admit to some serious raw fanboyism coming into play for that. It's just so surreal to me that the wait is actually over and I actually got what I wanted to get, and that sense of, oh my god, it's actually here is probably raised the rating some. But yeah, I couldn't be happier with this. I'm looking forward to getting the box set for this album in the mail, and I'm looking forward to whatever Hybrid plan on doing for their next album. Even if that ends up taking another 8 years, if they can continue to deliver material as great as this, I'll wait as long as they think they'll need. So, yeah. I'm overall feeling a 9.3 out of 10. But of course, this is just my opinion. You can feel free to disagree with it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts, so leave the comments in the comment thing down there. Shout out to my Patreon supporters, they're awesome people. If you want to add yourself to that list or make me review something, link to my Patreon is in the description. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today. See you next time.